afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominique Moreau. I'm a ringer with the St. Andrew's Ringer in Ottawa, as well as a percussionist with the Ottawa Symphony. And today we're talking about the buckets, the big bass bells, and how to play them without hurting yourself. The most important thing about ringing bass bells is your health. It's easy to hurt yourself while playing those bells, and the workshop today is mostly about how to play them without hurting yourself. And the first consideration is your posture, how you're grounded. You want both your feet flat on the ground as much as you can. You don't want to put your weight on one side or another, because the bells add a lot of weight when you're playing them. The second thing is your hands. Where the bell rests on your hand can create a lot of friction because there's so much weight, and we're holding them for long periods of time. Padding on your glove is the most important thing, I would say. If the glove you have doesn't have enough padding on its own, you can add medical tape underneath it. Make sure it sticks well enough so it doesn't move. And the points you're going to want to have more is on the first joint of the thumb, where it meets the rest of the hand, and same thing on the index finger. That's usually where the bell will rest. And you want to make sure you have enough padding there so that the weight is not pressing on two spots, but pressing on the whole hand. The next important thing is how you hold the bell. Your grip on the bell should be loose. You don't want to hold the bell very tight. The bell should be able to move a little bit. You basically want it resting on your index and thumb, and then just loosely wrapping your fingers around the handle. This should be similar to any other bell. The next part is lifting the bell. Before you ring the bell, you need to have it in your hands. With smaller bells, often we only play 2 bells, and we can keep them in our hands most of the time. The heavy bells is a strain to hold them for long periods of time like this if you're not playing. And they don't tend to play as often. So we're usually going to put them down as often as we can. That also means we lift them more often. Sadly, lifting those heavy bells can be troublesome. The weight of the bell is closer to the end of the casting. So whenever you're lifting from the handle, the weight is around here. And it's a very inefficient way of lifting this bell. When I'm lifting bell with one hand only, is usually because I don't have time and I already have a bell in my other hand. This will happen when you have quick changes usually. For example, if I play a scale, I will need to put down bells and lift them very quickly. This can be very hard on your arms and on your wrists, so you want to try to do it as least often as possible. Usually I will try to lift the bell with 2 hands. Either 2 hands on the handle and then be ready, or the hand that will play on the handle and the other one on the lip, because I'm wearing gloves, this is not a problem. And then it's ready to play. That way the weight is shared between the arms and is not as dangerous for your wrists. You're basically lifting a bell that is half as heavy because you're sharing the weight on each hand. You obviously cannot do it for both bells, so I would suggest you lift the heavier one with 2 hands and then the smaller one with 1 hand. Now we can ring the bell. Once you've lifted it, it's in your hand. You want to avoid ringing with your wrist. I will do it once, but you want to avoid doing that. This is often what we do with the smaller bells, and it works fine. But with the heavier bells, you don't want to put that much strain on your wrist because you're trying to hold the weight of this bell away from you with just this little part of your body. So instead, for the very big bells, you're going to try to ring with your entire arm. If you watch carefully, I'll do it slowly. My wrist barely moves. It's the same motion as a regular bell, but it's done with the arm, the entire arm. always keeping the bell in motion, it's easier, but it's also staying very vertical at most times. I'm trying to ring upwards is how I think of it. You want to try to avoid moving your wrists too much. If I have a lot of time and I only need one bell, or if I'm trying to play very loud with only one bell, I will often lift the bell with two hands, keep the two hands on the handle, and ring it with two hands. The weight is much easier to handle that way, and I can play much louder without hurting myself. The two-handed ringing option is also very useful when you're trying to play soft. You don't need the strength when you're playing soft. The belt barely moves, but you need a lot of control. And having this extra hand on the handle allows you that much more control over when the bell is going to tip over and the clapper will hit the casting. When you're playing softly, you can also lift the bell with two hands, keep it vertical with the one hand, and just use the clapper with your other hand. It can be very easy to place notes that way and to play them softly. After you've played your note, you often need to damp the bell. There's many options when you're playing a large bell to damp. My favorite one, if you're playing the same bell again and if you're holding it with two hands, ring, damp with your glove on the lip of the bell. It stops the sound instantly. And you don't need to tip the bell towards you and then have to tip it away from you when you're playing the next note. The second option is similar to what we do with the smaller bells. You're going to play your note and put it to your shoulder. You will need more surface area to dampen a big bell. If you just try to touch the bell on your shoulder, barely anything will happen. It takes a longer time to damp that way. So you're going to try to have as much surface area as you can. It's close to hugging a bell, basically. You can also damp with your hand on the casting. It works as well as the lip. By far the most common dampening technique though for bass bells is the table. Because we tend to have many bells, we're going to often pick it up, play it, put it on the table. And if you're going to get another bell right after, instead of dampening and then putting it on the table, we're going to combine the two in one motion. Play, dampen. The dampening or the tabling of the bell is as difficult for your body as the lifting of the bell. So you want to make sure you're not just bringing the bell down. The weight again will shift away from your wrist and will put a lot of strain on your wrist. And the big bells are easy to break. You don't want to throw them on the table. So you want to have as much control as you can when you're putting them on the table. If you can, use two hands. Much easier. And last dampening technique you can use, instead of using your shoulder, if you're playing low, you can use your belly. That way the bell is already close to the table when you're done playing it. Another consideration when playing the big bells is that depending on the assignment that you have, you might have to play two bells at once. My best suggestion for those cases is to try and lift the bells at the same time so you can mirror the motions in both of your arms before you play. It's easier to remember all the right steps if you do it at the same time rather than do it one at a time. And then when you play them, you want to keep in mind that same motion we talked earlier. No wrist, all arm, upwards. There's a few special techniques you can use with bass bells. One that is fairly easy to do is the pluck. Because the mouth of the bell is so big, you have plenty of room to maneuver the clapper and play your pluck. It's often a very easy way to play a staccato note. Techniques that you should not use include the gyro, the vibrato. Because of the way the weight of the bell is, if you're trying to go side to side, you're putting a lot of strain on your wrists. I would advise not to do them, and if you really have to, try to have both hands on the handle while you do those techniques. And for a better effect, don't try to do it too fast. The low frequencies don't work well with a fast gyro or fast vibrato. Two that you will see often for bass bells include the echo. Again, I would suggest that you use two hands as much as possible to play something like this, because the weight of the bell is away from your wrists, and it is very straining to do so. The other one is the swing. Same idea. You want to do it with two hands as much as possible. I want to clarify that this workshop isn't only for the lowest possible bells. In the workshop, I use mostly the four lowest bells I have access to, which is C3 to F3. And they're very heavy, very big. You can obviously go much lower than that in some ensembles. But the same techniques apply for everything that is big. If you find G and A3 to be big, you will want to use the same technique that I talk about in the workshop. For some people, it might even be higher. In this case, maybe C and D4. For some people, those are light, and you can play them with your wrists. But for some people, they're still very heavy, and you will want to use that same arm motion without using your wrist. The last thing I want to mention is a special technique I use quite often if I have to move bells quickly with only one hand and the piece is loud. The lifting, playing, dampening, and tabling of the bell is a lot of motions. If you can combine them, as we said earlier, you can table the bell and damp the bell in one motion. If you want to avoid extra motions, you can do the same with the lifting and the playing. Instead of lifting and playing, you can do what is called a back ring. So the lifting of the bell will also be the playing motion. It requires a certain amount of practice before you can get it. I will do it from the side so you can see. The motion comes from the biceps. Instead of coming away from your body, you will bring the bell to your body. All in one motion. I often lift the handle first, and then it's one quick motion where you will bring the bell to your shoulder. It's much faster to play that way. The hardest part about this playing technique is the timing, because you have to lift the bell at exactly the right moment, because you're putting a lot of energy in the bell at once. It's easy to be late. You need to anticipate a lot when you do that. It takes a split second for the bell to go from laying on the table and ringing, because the bell moves first, and when it stops moving, the clapper starts moving, or keeps moving in the same direction. There's a bit of time there, so you want to make sure you account for that time. Practice this technique first on your own before trying to introducing it to the ensemble in rehearsals.